Majora's Mask is kind of the dark horse of Zelda games. I mean, over the past 20 some odd years, it has established a massive cult following and is even a lot of people's favorite Zelda game, but it wasn't always like that. Ocarina of Time redefined what was possible in gaming in 1998. An expansive open world, deep storytelling, legendary soundtrack, the list goes on. Even today, it is still my favorite video game of all time, and I'd be shocked if that ever changes. I'm also definitely not the only one that thinks this way. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time won Game of the Year and tons of other awards upon its release. It's still sitting at 98 on Metacritic, which is number one among all video games. With that much success from a game, it's normal for developers to feel pressured to make a sequel as soon as possible. From a business standpoint, it just makes sense to ride the hype train while you can. Nintendo could have easily made Ocarina of Time Part 2, which would have required way less creativity and effort, and also would have been much less of a risk. We've seen developers do this many times, and usually the sequel will receive generally good reviews and generate a ton of sales. But if you've ever heard the old saying, no risk, no reward, you would understand why Nintendo approached Majora's Mask very differently. While a sequel without many changes may do well at first, it usually leads to the downfall of a franchise long term. Development for The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask started in January of 1999, just 2 months after the release of Ocarina of Time. While fans had to wait 5 years between Link's Awakening and Ocarina of Time, the Dream Team was able to ensure that wouldn't be the case with Majora's Mask by using the same engine as Ocarina of Time. But to keep things spicy, they added a 3-day system. Now, if you've played Majora's Mask numerous times like I have, you're quite familiar with the system and you've learned how to manipulate it. And if you haven't completed Majora's Mask, chances are this system is probably what made you quit. If any of you have never played the game at all, essentially how it works is you have 3 days of in-game time to save the world. This translates to 54 minutes in real life. If you fail to do so in the 3 days, you lose everything except key items and masks, and you have to start all over from the beginning again. While the system gives Majora's Mask its unique identity, it causes you to feel rushed the whole time, which can create tons of stress and anxiety. When you dig deeper into the dark storyline, you understand that this feeling of urgency is exactly what Nintendo was going for. Now, the development team faced heavy time constraints and only had 2 years to finish the game, so for this reason the game reuses a lot of assets and music from Ocarina, but with slight enhancements. It was actually one of 3 Nintendo 64 games to require an expansion pack, an attachment that doubles the RAM of the console, in order to play, mainly due to its well-known and loved fog effect. While this may be specific to me, aside from the expansion pack, when I think of Majora's Mask I can almost feel that scratchy holographic label on the gold cartridge of the collector's edition. Just another great choice made by Nintendo to make the game really stand out. I've mentioned Majora's Mask in a lot of my other videos, so it's no secret that this is one of my favorite games of all time. And the biggest reason for that is it feels vastly different than all other Zelda games, yet it still feels like a Zelda game. I was probably overly critical of Breath of the Wild, because although I think Breath of the Wild is a great game, I feel like it lost the feeling of being a Zelda game. When I mention Majora's Mask in other videos, I often talk about the dark storyline, and when I say dark story, I really mean it. This is Nintendo we're talking about, the guys who are most famous for making a story about an Italian plumber trying to save the princess by defeating living mushrooms.
It's me, Mario.
So it's safe to say their plots are usually pretty ridiculous and kid-friendly. Although Majora's Mask is rated E for everybody here in North America, I think the main reason for that is children would find the story too deep to understand, and the game would be too difficult to actually progress anywhere. At least that was the case when I was a kid. Without spoiling too much of the plot here, this game takes place in Termina, which is an alternate reality to Hyrule. There is this bratty ass kid called the Skull Kid, and the game starts with him jacking Link and stealing his horse Epona and the Ocarina of Time. The Skull Kid then puts a curse on Link, turning him into a Deku Scrub. After progressing a tiny bit, you meet a familiar face, the Happy Mask Salesman, who lifts your curse and transforms it into a mask, allowing you to switch between human and Deku by simply putting on and removing your mask. The Skull Kid also jacked the Happy Mask Salesman, but what was stolen from him was an incredibly powerful mask called Majora's Mask. That mask carries a strong evil, which is why the Skull Kid becomes a psychopath when wearing it. The Skull Kid is trying to use his newly acquired evil power to make the moon crash into Termina and destroy everything. Hence the 3-day cycle, as if the Skull Kid is not stopped within 3 days, the moon will come crashing down and destroy everything. The story alone is dark for sure, but this is even more apparent when you watch the people react day by day as the moon gets closer. Some people are very clearly frightened, while others seem to not care that they're about to die. Regardless of what their reactions are, seeing people's mentality completely change as they know the end is approaching is quite a dark thing for a Nintendo game. The 3-day cycle and general darker tone of the game aren't the only things that set it apart from the other Zelda games. Like the Deku mask previously mentioned, you acquire masks that either transform you or give you some sort of unique ability. A lot of these masks are somewhat useless, but some of them completely change what you are able to do. I personally enjoy wearing the Goron mask for most of the game due to the increased movement speed and overall aesthetic appeal. With all these changes to the story and the gameplay, what keeps Majora's Mask feeling like a traditional Zelda game is the dungeons. While there are only 4 of them, each are quite long and deep with excellent puzzles that often require using an ability from a mask. Scenery-wise, the 4 dungeons really stand out from one another, making them very memorable. A massive complaint I had about Breath of the Wild was the lack of variety in the dungeons, as Zelda fans often look forward to dungeons and their final bosses more than anything else in the game. So that's my breakdown of what is, in my opinion, the greatest direct sequel of all time, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. One of the most unique and awesome games ever. While it's not for everyone, hopefully this video inspired at least a few of you to check it out. Tears of the Kingdom comes out later this week, and I'm really just hoping that Nintendo took some of the inspiration from what made Majora's Mask special and used that inspiration to make another great Zelda sequel. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe as it does help the channel grow, and I plan to eventually have more Zelda content down the road.